You know, growing up sucks. Sure, we get to drive cars, get paid actual money, and be the boss of our own humble abode, but guess what? Insurance costs a lot, money can dry up like a well if not careful, and in this day and age, you'll be lucky to even make rent on your one-bedroom apartment. So let's go back to a time without those responsibilities, to the days of our youth, playing outside and using our imagination to wish up fantastical places to explore. Then again, most of my time was spent mostly indoors, watching other people have fun in the sun on my little small TV screen. I was always fascinated by shows about childhood fantasy adventures and was drawn to things like The Never-Ending Story and The Princess Bride as children's stories brought to life. Or Rupert, where a small bear goes on adventures and explores a wide world with its pleasantries and trepidations entwined into one. But whenever I do go outside, there are places to go, trees to climb, an entire valley of my hometown to travel around. But as it is for all of us, that sense of wonderment faded into the background and into the passage of time. And that's why when 2018 rolled around and a new Netflix show with that level of childhood imagination came to my attention, I was considered cautious about it. True that most animated shows in the modern age are mostly well executed, yet they tend to forego small-scale explorations of the countryside for very urban and trendy entertainment. But contrary to my beliefs, Hilda proved to be just the show needed for my personal tastes. Based on the comic series of the same name, Hilda rolled into the lovely, hateable streaming service with its captivating whimsiness, enchanting environment, and likable personalities to both wow critics and audiences, along with taking this fair share of accolades. The journeys that our little adventurer goes through, from an invisible little people's village to a mountain range of troll nests, have driven much of what makes watching Hilda fun and wholesome. Something I haven't experienced since the forgotten days of those tiny adventures I'd filmed decades ago. And with The Mountain King coming out and a third and final season announced, I want to go over why the simple adventures of a blue-haired girl and her deer fox companion were much more endearing and effective than its higher budget competition. And maybe the best place to start is where it all began. Luke Pearson is the creator of Hilda, originally titled Hilda Folk and inspired by the many Scandinavian folk tales he read while at university. A world conquered by human dwellers trying to push the magical realm out, and to which a young girl with blue hair tries to tackle both states in a coming-of-age tale of adventure. Yet in Pearson's notes, she was merely just a part of his first artwork pitches, and not yet the character we know and love from the series. Actually, the bulk of the story wasn't even fully realized yet. The real seed of the series came from me wanting to do something that drew on low-key Scandinavian folklore and a few other specific influences. I didn't have a particular story in mind or even know that it should be a comic. I was musing that it could be a book, or a film, or a game. Before Hilda got published, Luke Pearson's previous work had an air of misery and depression that was uplifted by the simple acts of humanity that dwell within all of us. How some people are made into the person they are today, to the anxieties and fear of having a deadly disease in one's testicles. One of my favorites, Everything We Miss, centers around the struggles of relationships and how we can become the demon we'd swore to never be as it all begins to break. It's a very good comic that sadly is out of print though, so the best way you can find it is just by searching on the web. But to go from pop surrealism down the ravenous highway that is being an adult to a fantastical, lighthearted comic strip was a huge leap for Pearson, and one he wasn't so sure he could pull off. I was concerned about that for a long time. Doing children's work in general wasn't necessarily what I was most compelled to do when I started with Hilda. It was more like that was the comic I was best positioned to make when the opportunity came along. And even when he grew success from Hilda's publication, he always had a nagging bite that seemed to run down his neck. The time might come when I have to give up and accept that I'm just a children's comic book artist, but I don't think it will be connected to whether or not Hilda is successful. People sometimes ask me if Hilda is going to be my Tintin, and the thought of that always chilled me to the bone. But if that does end up being the case, then maybe that's fine. Luke Pearson definitely has shown a level of growth in the way he draws his comics, and to someone who enjoys comics on the level of Art Spiegelman, Marjan Satrapi, and even Jeff Smith, I'd say his career change to a children's comic book artist was the right call. As Hilda began to make its leaps and bounds across readers' love of the woods and escapades across the city of Trollberg, Netflix, with supervision from Pearson, would be in the hands of several production studios to animate Hilda Folk into Hilda, an animated Netflix original series. When it came to adapting to screen, Luke had some issues from selling his rights to Netflix, but as he put it in his interview with Pictoplasma, on the one hand, it was very exciting, but I was also prepared that it might go in a direction that wasn't what I wanted. Happily, it turned out pretty much exactly as I would have wished. Much of the animation was done at Mercury Filmworks, who are best known for providing services to a plethora of animated shows, including Netflix's Out of This World called Hit Centaur World, and Craig McCracken's latest show, Kid Cosmic. Of course, with anything needing to fit from comic to TV, some elements were added in order to make some story beats flow more effectively. An example being Hilda's conflicted feelings on moving away from the countryside and into the city. Whereas in the comic it was a quick segue in contrast to her previous home, now it's her genuinely trying to live up to her mother's expectations. The story of Hilda the animated series also creates new characters for Hilda to interact with, as in the original, it was just her and her mother that provided much of the internal conflict in the pages. The additions of the perfectionist Frida and cowardly David are similar to how Neil Gaiman's Coraline added in the character of Wybie in order to give his main heroine a close-to-age friend to work off with. Several side characters also included are the librarian witch Kaisa.
I believe you find that book to be of interest.
The meteorologist Victoria Van Gale.
Gracious, isn't this a wonderful surprise? I haven't had a tour group up here in quite some time. Oh, that reminds me, don't go anywhere.
And the self-righteous patrolman Eric Alberg.
I bear a striking resemblance, wouldn't you say?
There are even some characters that get expanded roles in the TV series, such as the elf Alpha, who goes from a minor character to a part of the main cast.
More humans than I've ever seen in one place. Fascinating noises. It's all very strange, but also exciting.
And the Woodman, who has a tendency to let himself into people's homes.
So, barging in on your neighbors is your new thing. I may have to move.
Much of the episodes have that typical Netflix continuity where the overarching stories collide together near the final stretch, but all have a simple moral to cap off before the end credits. Simple for a young audience to understand, but that never underplays it or feels tacky. They're all life lessons all people should be receptive to, with the biggest one being that nothing in life stays the same, and to come to terms with the changes in life. A lesson Hilda frequently tries to not think about. Yet before we get into why our main lead is such a fascinating adventure to learn about, I love me them fall colors and I just want to gush about them. The closest comparison I can give to Hilda's animation is that it invokes a sort of wondrous connection to the season of fall. Its natural landscapes have a beautiful cleanliness to them, and make standout regions like Hilda's backyard or the tourist spots of Trollberg look distinct and wild. And even the general essentials like its character movement, design, aesthetic reminds me of childhood shows I'd watch on endless repeat. Which is why the compositing and colors of this show are its standout feature. It reminds me of those 3-bit games I used to play as a kid, such as Pokemon or games with similar graphics. You can even look at the skybox, it's more or less a paint swatch, jogging those same memories I just described. Much of the colors in the show reflect the stasis of the world Hilda is familiar with, and are pathways into understanding the show's various ideas. The most prominent are in Hilda's own palette, like her blue hair, red sweater and boots, and yellow scarf. It speaks a lot about how she can interact with the world around her, and can dictate on what she believes in. Anything connected to her, like books or the wilderness, will be a major focus to her. Even when the sun goes down, the region is covered in a blanket of diluted blues. It doesn't do anything extraordinary with this animation, but Hilda's accomplishments are in the subtle presentation and effort in making a show that invokes that same comfort you get from your favorite pastime, or even just sitting by a fire. Also, gotta love it when the characters look like something out of the Adventures of Tintin with their eyes and establishing shots. Actually, the drawing style is pretty similar to the classic long Claire style that Tintin's artist Hans was known for, although the lines in Hilda aren't as harsh or straight. All credit is given towards the show's director, Andy Coyle, and many of the storyboard artists, editors, and writing staff that make the visuals of Hilda a significant stature amongst a sea of other 2D animated children's programming. But what stands higher than that are the creatures that dwarf our main character's pedestal, both figuratively and very, very literally. The book Luke Pearson was inspired to make Hilda from was Scandinavian folklore, illustrations of the traditional beliefs of the northern peoples by William A. Craigie. To Pearson, Hilda was a means to embellish what was easily a pretty boring biography of folktales into fascinations of the old world. Of course, trolls and elves have stayed alive in the public for years thanks to authors like Tolkien and their high fantasy creations, elves being a wise yet prude race of treehuggers, and trolls being dumb, monstrous behemoths. But in the world of Hilda, they stayed true to their original sources, but with their own sui generis identity. Elves are tiny and peculiar beings that are invisible to anyone who doesn't sign their seals of approval, and that causes much hostility towards Hilda's family, as they're seen as a nuisance on their plot of land. They obligate themselves to their order and make sure that everything goes by the books, even if it leads to small-scale warfare to keep things in check. One of the more prevalent and dangerous creatures in the series are the trolls. Powerful vagabonds that can toss boulders like discuses, but have a weakness to the sun and the sound of high-pitched bells. That's why the city of the aptly named Trollberg raised high walls around their perimeter and outfitted large bells to try and keep the trolls out. And thus they try to keep all creatures small and large from their city gates, as a means to flush out anything unnatural from their lands. It closely represents the state of how as Christianity began to take over, it was also influencing the way Scandinavians saw their past history and began to change it according to text, such as what walls mean to the people. Now it can mean peace and sanctuary, but it's also an entrapment, sealing our world from theirs. Yet some creatures have overcome this hurdle and adapted to the landscapes. The creators of nightmares, the Mara, have become well acquainted in being angsty teenagers. Vitras grow without any disturbances near the unkempt walls, and the Nessies thrive in the cracks and corners of modern homes. In a sense, it's like how in the years of automation and personal conveniences we humans have done, little things like birds, squirrels, and even raccoons have adapted well into the urban environments. Hilda has many underlying messages in this show, and that also includes environmentalism. How the more we try to keep out the natural order of things, the more it will try to rebel against us, as in the case with the trolls and the subsequent walls barring entry, and that the solution to such a problem seems to be cooperative in one another's plights, like letting some jive woodman come in the house once in a while. Now you might be saying that the ideal bridge for this scenario would be our plucky young adventurer, but in the beginning, she was definitely more of a troll than a little girl. When it came to creating Hilda, Luke Pearson had this to say: "I wanted a character who was very positive, and who would get up in adventures as a result of her own curiosity, empathy, or sense of responsibility. The kind of character who has an adventure because she really wants to, not because she's forced into it." In the beginning of the series, Hilda is a bright-eyed and constant curiosity of someone who loves the outdoors. Someone who would pitch a tent in a rainstorm and just be content with the thought of just being on a journey. She's headstrong, eccentric, and competent in her relationship with the fantastical backyard she and her mom resides in. Or, formerly. After an incident with a giant and the pressures of being surrounded by too many hostile neighbors, the family's move to the big city starts to wane on Hilda, especially interacting with kids her own age, or even with figures of authority. In the episode of the TV series involving Mara, she has a looming fear that stems from her not knowing how to ride a bike. It's not that riding the bike part that scares her, but instead her wavering feelings about life in the city, and how hard it is to convert to this change in habitat.
It's not my fault! I'm not from here!
The biggest struggle for Hilda is adaptability, and to know what not to change and what needs to. In many of the episodes involving the supernatural, like tide mice or time worms, she is usually the main culprit in forcing her apparent acts of generosity upon people who she cares for, such as in the second season's episode involving a time-traveling magazine and a couple who never got together.
The past is the past. I think we've messed with it enough for today.
She even shares parallels with characters who have similar personalities but that take things too far and cause more destruction because of their need to advance everyone's lives.
You wanted to explore this place just as much as I did.
Not like this I didn't, and you know it. This isn't your world.
And yet here I stand.
And the struggles and shortcomings to not accept the unpredictability that life throws at you puts a real strain on several of Hilda's friends and family members. Even her deer fox companion, during an especially tearful episode, goes on a trek back to his homeland, whereas Hilda feels like she doesn't even have a home to return to.
Sometimes it's better to retrace old steps than it is to forge new paths.
This is what makes her a fascinating character to follow. She still has her positives of being full of spunk and optimism that many can enjoy, but she also has those many moments of introspective drama that makes her identifiable, especially if you grew up like her. Whether it was because of moving away or the loss of a home, you can feel the many emotions going on inside her head. And to see her overcome those challenges and be accepting of the fact that life may not go exactly as planned, but that you can be glad that they created memories.
But that's all it is. Memories. Our house is gone. The mountain's gone. Our life here's gone.
Hilda is not the only one going through struggles in the big city. Her mother, Joanne, is having a much tougher time than any in handling the mischiefs that Hilda gets into. Back in the woods, it would have been easier, but in Trollberg, the stress really starts to stack up. Whether it be from the constant anxiety of Hilda's overall safety to her not making as many friends as she'd hoped for with the move, Joanne feels more isolated than ever and just wants Hilda to keep her company as she adjusts.
Look, I've been here before. I got into trouble too when I was your age, and I know it's no fun.
So stop it then.
I'm doing it for your own good. You need to learn that actions have consequences.
She even has to keep her creative life as a casual gig since renting an apartment costs a lot, and she needs a job as a clerk to keep her and Hilda well fed. Something to which I eerily relate to at this moment in my life. Even just the effort to get together with her daughter and do something as simple as a board game is hard.
But look at this new game I got. Let's play around before we eat.
I don't think I have time.
You're staying at home with me.
Why?
Because it'll be fun. Oh, come on. Am I really such bad company?
Joanne feels like she's losing a valuable connection to Hilda, and at various points will put her foot down in order to get her attention.
Why do I have to keep you company anyway? It's not my fault that you sit around on your own all day and don't have anyone else to talk to.
Hilda, go to your room.
In the second season's final episode, Hilda and her mother get lost in the mountains where the trolls reside and must navigate their way out. Joanne's cautiousness gets in the way of Hilda's unflinching resolve and keeps them at each other's throats. It not only looks at and reveals the true nature of the trolls and their misunderstandings with humans, but how Joanne and Hilda must find a compromise in order to cap off their conflict.
You really don't wish I was different?
I wish I knew what in the world you were thinking sometimes, but I wouldn't swap it for anything.
It's especially true for all relationships between parent and child, with miscommunication being one of many obstacles to get a grasp on when growing up. Hilda must see her mother as more of a person with real feelings, while Joanne has to understand her daughter's boundaries and when it's appropriate to get involved. It's one of the most interesting developments in the story and gets a lot of attention not only in the original comic, but also in the animated series. It looks at the complications of being a single parent raising a child and how many can have difficulty in providing the necessary life experiences and lessons to build character. Kids Entertainment regularly sees mother figures as a detriment to the hero's journey, that they would be the fence to adventure. But in Hilda, Joanne is seen as a thoughtful and vigilant parental guardian who just wants what's best for her child, and will do anything to make her happy. And it's put to the test when, in the aftermath of their hike in the mountains, Hilda turns into a troll. Hilda and the Mountain King is a story that wraps up the plot thread involving the trolls and the citizens of Trollberg. As a troll, Hilda discovers more of the culture between troll society and uncovers a big mystery surrounding their recent actions to breach the city walls. And many of the themes and ideas already discussed in this video finally come together in a resolution that finds a hesitant solution to the various conflicts. One is between the humans and trolls, with the head patrolman, Eric, looking to follow his family legacy in keeping the town safe despite the police and not intrude upon troll territory. The constant need to validate his status, coupled with the intrusions, daily raids, and forced migration, goes into great depth of how humans have been dissolving the natural world for their own benefit. Fighting for peace means clearing the unknown terrain and building walls to keep nature out, while tossing merit badges to folks who preserve what's left of it. The message is clear in how expansion hurts the environment, and that if we can respect nature in its ups and downs, then coexistence can be possible. But it's not just a bigger conflict that gets a crescendo, but also Hilda being caught in the middle of who she is. She was an avid explorer back then, but after some time in the city, she begins to feel like she's lost between two worlds and even envisions life being a troll with freedom and the outdoors. Yet, after being turned into a troll, she starts to see their plights and understands how the rambunctious and instability of life without consequence can be isolating and even hazardous, more so when it's just being stuck in a cave away from the sunlight. She starts to acknowledge the comfort life offers with her mother and her friends, finding an equal mix of being both a troll as well as a fun-loving adventurer she always was. On top of being a well-crafted story with a great conclusion, Hilda and the Mountain King highlights how much the show and the original source material truly understand the moral complexities of childlike innocence and the need to balance priorities, to be ourselves, find our homes, and to be fulfilled in whatever life has to offer. Maybe that's why Hilda got me so invested in this strange fondness of the unknown wilderness, and why I was so adamant to escape from it. I don't know, maybe being indoors for most of my life has changed my perspective of how I view the world, and especially with COVID-19 and feeding my anxieties with the news and toxicity has certainly shaped my very existence. I'm similar to Hilda in that I'm inflexible to certain changes, and that I just want life to stay as it is. Why should I bend to the will of it? Don't I have a say in anything? Well, life is harder when you're a responsible adult, and that maybe what we all need is something to fall back on and take us back to our childhood. When we climbed trees, made up grand adventures with our friends, explored nearby forests, and got too many ticks in our skin. Our experiences shape us to who we want to be, and I believe that's the delight that Hilda represents. It's not highly fantasized like other major animated works, but it doesn't need to be. It invokes magic from its sincerity and love for stories of essence and variety. Sure, we may be older than the intended audience the series is channeled for, but nevertheless, the ideas and the situations are empathetically true to every person who still has that childlike innocence still within them. But since we have grown up, we are more than willing to keep asking the hard questions and find simple answers to our real-world struggles. It's a series that really is approachable to all age groups, and both the Netflix show and Pearson's adventure, drawn in the perspective of a curious adolescent, is certainly a show worth an exploration.
Version is, I just wish to be home. And I ended up here. From afar. I guess Trollberg is my home now.
Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and please tell me what your thoughts are on the series as a whole. Like this video and be sure to hit the subscribe button if you want to follow what I put out next time in the future. It's your Bra Man, listening to those merry little breezes.